In the center of the western Mediterranean Sea, not far off the coast of Italy, lies Sardinia. This rocky island place is a natural fortress, and yet Sardinia has never been populous enough to defend itself. And so for thousands of years, this strategic bit of land has fallen prey to the invader. Armies of ancient Greece and later the Romans all came to conquer and to plunder. And there's evidence of earlier invasions. These stone towers, called nurages, dot the island everywhere. No one knows their origin or purpose, for they were constructed before the beginning of history, even before the use of the arch. It's believed, however, that these were the battle towers from which one invader made war against another, while the Sardinians themselves remained aloof, choosing the protection of their granite hills. Here they still live today, unaffected by the modern ways of a modern world. It's true that one modern note was introduced in 1888. It's a sturdy little train, quite capable of serving the simple needs of the hill folk. And these are the people of our story. If it looks like the fireman is beating the engine to make it go faster, he is. For sometimes when the rails are wet, he must hammer on the engine sandbox to make the sand flow and provide better traction for the wheels. Although its speed is somewhat faster than that of a wild boar, the little train's schedule is quite often erratic. But all things considered, it performs very well. Safety first is the primary rule of the road, and the grade crossings are well guarded. But there's always some foolhardy, impatient character who just doesn't have a moment to spare. Through all the years, the Sardinians have remained independent and self-reliant, always managing somehow to make do with what their island offers. Much of this land is so rocky, it can be tilled only by scratching the thin topsoil with sticks, and so poor, it will produce only barley. So the reaping must be carried out as gently as picking flowers, to preserve each precious grain. And by dint of this careful doing, in the end, the farmers have a crop. This is another and more unusual mountain harvest, chestnuts. And in Sardinia, chestnuts aren't used just for stuffing turkey. They're carefully stored and serve as a vegetable throughout the lean winter months. These wild sheep are the original inhabitants of the mountains. They're called mufloni. Once they were plentiful, but hunters reduced their numbers drastically. And today they're found only in the most remote areas and are protected by law. In all probability, the mufloni were the ancestors of these flocks, which are so important to the Sardinians. In addition to wool, the sheep provide a basic item in the Sardinian diet. Each morning and evening they're gathered for milking. Later, the milk will be converted into cheese. cheese is made on the spot, right in the field. This primitive process produces a rather primitive flavor, because this cheese is literally handmade. Of course, wool is the most important product of the flocks, for later it will be woven into a strong waterproof cloth called orbachi. Now, on these hot summer days, shearing sheep could lead to sheer exhaustion, and so the men pause for a touch of tonic now and then. Although the sheep have lost their winter woolens, the memory seems to linger on. After the shearing, the wool is soaked first in warm water, then in the cool shallows of nearby streams. This is to remove some of the oil, but not all of it, for it's the oil that makes orbachi waterproof. After drying, the wool is carried down into the village where it will be spun into yarn for weaving. Even in everyday life, traditional dress is still worn in many villages. Here, with balls of homespun wool, the women folk are laying out the long threads of the warp before putting it on the loom. Of course, in every village, there's at least one small boy who has a talent for getting in the way. He means well, but he's not much of a help in this laying out process. Perhaps they should have laid out the small boy first. This sturdy handmade loom on which the housewife weaves the orbachi is over 100 years old. The design has been in use for thousands of years, but it still does an excellent job. The cloth is by no means finished when it first comes from the loom. The material must be worked like this for many hours until it acquires a flexibility. The versatile orbachi is used not only in aprons and skirts for everyday wear, but a lighter variety forms an important part of the colorful costumes worn for gala events. The needlework is intricate, artistic, and exact. All the dyes used are homemade from roots and berries, and they never run or fade. This one burrow-powered mill, in which barley is being ground, is an exact duplicate of mills unearthed in the ruins of ancient Pompeii. The burro wears a blindfold to keep him from getting dizzy, but nothing has been provided to keep him from getting bored. In 12 years, he's traveled about 5,000 miles, or 16 times around the island, but he's never left home. Lunchtime, and a whole morning's work has produced about 5 pounds of flour. The blindfold is like an automatic starter. The The moment it's put on, he's back in circulation again. Turning the barley flour into bread is a job for professionals. They visit each home in the village and bake a week's supply at a time, taking their pay and a share of the bread itself. Patted into oversized wafers, the bread is called carta da musica, or music paper, because of its yellow and parchment-like appearance. This remarkable bread eliminates the age-old problem of dishwashing, for it's not only good to eat, but when split in half, it becomes the plate on which dinner is served. Not all the baking is plain. There's the fancy type, too, and this work is also done by professionals. Now, of course, these aren't part of the daily diet. There's going to be a wedding in the village. Almost anywhere in the world, where there's a wedding, there's music. These pipes are distantly related to Scotch bagpipes, but here one's cheeks must serve as the bangs. After the concert, friends of the groom serenade the bride. Freely translated, their musical compliments go something like this. It's wonderful to see you so lovely. To the heavens I address this prayer. May you both live in peace as peaceful angels. The groom, not to be outdone, has a few words to say too. And now each of the bridesmaids must have her turn. It was written that you should be together. Although destiny has allowed your eyes to meet but once, still it is enough. The wedding celebration always ends with dancing, but the dancing may not end for several days. Like all hard-working people, the Sardinians make the most of their holidays and festivals. On these occasions, the villagers proudly display their handiwork in colorful costumes and fancy decorations. Sometimes they'll work and save for months to prepare for a few hours of merrymaking. In contrast to the sparkle and brilliance of the festive scenes, life in the hills has its solemn side too. For on this bleak and wintry day, the body of a shepherd who has died in the hills is brought into the village. With heavy hearts, relatives follow at a respectful distance. Before entering the presence of the dead, each dons the black cowl of mourning. A small boy watches, but only from idle curiosity. To him, this scene involves neither sorrow nor pity. It's simply another manifestation of nature, as normal as birth or breathing. Some of these mourners are professionals, paid to chant these rhyming laments that go back to ancient Greece. In this classic ritual, the verses are committed to memory, and if one mourner forgets her part, another quickly takes over. There are other curious customs deeply rooted in the past that have to do with the treatment of various ills. When the young one is put to bed with a slight fever, the village patriarch undertakes to cure the ailment. This time, the cure is to be produced through the magic of sparks struck from steel. The boy may seem a bit skeptical, but actually he has an inherent respect for the older generation and all its traditions. The origin of these peculiar rites is lost in antiquity, and even the old man can explain only how these things are done, but not why. Here's another and even stranger cure for an extremely rare ailment. It seems that if an owl flies over a child as he leaves the house at night, the child may not grow anymore. So to determine whether this tragedy has actually occurred, the child is measured. And if his reach exceeds his height, it's proof that the worst has happened. Steps must now be taken to counteract the evil influence of the owl. The ingredients for this process are the string with which he was measured, a lock of his hair, and a piece of his clothing. At first, the patient is merely bored. Then, when he begins to suspect that the cure will be worse than the calamity, he becomes more interested. When all the important ingredients are reduced to ashes, they're mixed with black coffee and administered with the proper incantations. Here's a man on his way to an important event that each year draws people from all over the island. It's a festival called the Ardia, and it's so unique, it must be seen to be believed. The Ardea is a reenactment of an incident involving a troop of Sardinian cavalry who rescued Constantine's banner in an ancient battle at the gates of Rome. In order to get a flying start, the horsemen will gather on a hill above the church, and all that follows will be highly symbolic. So, if you have difficulty following the details, remember there doesn't seem to be too much unity among the participants either. However, the program is supposed to go something like this. The men with the banners will try to escape from the men who are trying to take the banners from them. And when they... there they go. And when you think the whole thing's over and peace is restored, you discover it's just getting started. They still have to ride 9 more times around the church. And here we go again. If the original battle was rougher than this, it must have been something. And so on into the night. Since Sardinia is an island place, many of these island people draw their livelihood from the sea. And tuna fishing, in particular, is one of the basic industries on which Sardinia's prosperity depends. Each year at spawning time, the big fish pass by the island in a steady stream, and preparations begun late in March go on through April and most of May. All operations are under the direction of a chief called the Rice. His word is law to all members of the tuna fishing team. Nets seem hardly strong enough to hold a tuna, and they're not intended to. But the big fish are easily deflected from their course, and the nets laid out in long underwater corridors will serve to guide them to a final enclosure from which there's no escape. When all is ready, the big rope is laid out to which the nets will be attached. Everyone works early and late, and the Rice works hardest of all. For a successful catch depends entirely upon his judgment and ability. When the rope is finally in place, it stretches out 2 miles from the shore, and then the laying of the nets begins. Everything is ready now, but on a final inspection tour, a swordfish is discovered, caught in the net. In his threshing about, he's ripped holes in the giant snare, and they must be repaired. This cross marks the entrance to the final enclosure, called the Chamber of Death. And now begins the watching and waiting for the tuna to pass underneath. Lures are tossed to bring them closer to the surface, There's one. When enough tuna have entered the chamber of death, all the boats gather for the first matanza, or kill. They form a square about the chamber, and after a prayer, the rice gives the signal to begin the raising of the nets. When it's time to begin the gaffing, the rice lays down his oar as the starting signal. This is extremely hazardous work, especially for the men nearest the fish. As they give the tuna a last thrust into the boat, they all plunge forward over the rail. This is to avoid the lash of the powerful tail that might break an arm or even a back. Some of these fish, and this is one of them, weigh almost half a ton. Sometimes the plunge forward is too enthusiastic, and if this fellow doesn't get out in a hurry, he could be in for some real trouble. With the close of day, the run for home is made with light hearts and a heavy cargo. And surely this is a reward richly deserved. For these fishermen are symbolic of all the Sardinian people. For thousands of years, they've lived with hardship and adversity, but they've always made the most of very little. These, then, were the people of our story, a people rugged and resourceful, the island people of Sardinia.